Hi there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today is our block 2 of our wedding dress sampler quilt. And you can see this wedding dress, little by little, I'm cutting it apart into pieces, and we're gonna work our way through this wedding dress and use up the whole thing, and we're gonna make some beautiful things. So come along with me today and I'll show you what we did for block 2. I'm going to leave a cutting guide for this block in the description of this video, but I just wanted you to know this is an 8-point design, and it's number 1631C in my Barbara Brackman Quilt Encyclopedia. Now you'll notice some of these star designs, they can be named different things just based on the way the colors or the individual components of the 9 patch are arranged. For this block here, you can see I've got wedding dress fabric cut into 4.5-inch squares, and I've got a separate 4.5-inch square that is going to be the center of my block. I'm not exactly following the book. I've got 2 dark 6-inch squares and 2 wedding dress 6-inch squares for each of the 2 blocks that I'm going to make. Step 1, we are taking the 6-inch squares and we're going to turn those into hourglass blocks. I am on the wrong side of my wedding dress fabric. I'm drawing a diagonal line from corner to corner across my 6-inch square. Now I'm going to take one of my dark 6-inch squares, put that right sides together with my wedding dress fabric. I'm going to be sewing about 1/4 inch from this line that I drew. Then I will flip this unit around. I will sew another line about 1/4 inch from the line that I drew on the other side of the line. When I'm all done with that, I cut on the line that I drew, and that creates my half square triangles. I'm going to be pressing all these half square triangles open to the dark side, and I am using a 10-inch square of cotton fabric to protect my wedding dress fabric. I'm using a silk setting on my iron, and then I'm using that layer in between so that my polyester wedding dress does not get damaged. Next, we are going to turn these half square triangles into hourglass blocks. Because I'm making 2 sampler blocks, I have a total of 8 half square triangles. I'm going to take 4 of these half square triangles. I'm going to draw a diagonal line across the block using my ruler. I'm lining up a horizontal line on my ruler with the seam line that I stitched. To make my hourglass block, I'm taking one of my half square triangles without a line, putting that right sides together with one of my half square triangles that has the line drawn. I'm making sure that my dark and my light are opposite each other, and then I'm going to be able to slide this block together seam to seam. Those 2 seams, since I press them in opposite directions, that seam is going to lock or catch, and I'm going to use just a little straight pin to hold that in place until I can get to the sewing machine. Once I've got those all pinned in place, I'm taking these to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew about 1/4 inch from that line I drew. Then I'm going to go down the opposite side and sew another line about 1/4 inch from the line I drew. And here we have an hourglass block. Once we separate these and cut on the line we drew, we'll have 8 hourglass blocks. Or if you're just making one of these blocks, you'll have 4. After I press my hourglass blocks, I'm going to trim those to 4.5 inches. To trim my hourglass blocks down to 4.5 inches, I'm using the diagonal line on my ruler to line up with one of my seams. Then I'm also finding the 2.25 marks on my ruler, and I am covering that 2.25 inch where they meet with the 2 seams that meet in the middle of my block. Once I get the top and the right hand side trimmed, then I can use the 4.5 inch marks on my ruler, plus that diagonal line, plus that 2.25 inch mark. Now technically you would not need 6-inch squares to make 4.5 inch hourglass blocks. You could probably get away with a 5.5 inch square. I like to give myself a lot of extra wiggle room. With those hourglass blocks all complete, it's just time to lay out our block. I've got my little butterfly fabric here for my center block. I want my hourglass blocks to surround that with the light towards the center. And then my 4.5 inch wedding dress squares complete the 4 corners. Since I'm making 2 of these sampler blocks, you'll see I'm laying out my second block right on top of the first one. To assemble this block, I'm going to assemble it in rows, row 1 first, then row 2, then row 3, and then I will put all the 3 rows together. So you'll see I'm taking the top row, the first 2 units on the left, I'm stitching those right sides together, and then I'm going to chain these. So I'm going to move on to the leftmost units of row 2, then the leftmost units of row 3, then I'm going to go back to the leftmost units of row 1 for the second block. Now here's where I ran into a little trouble with this wedding dress fabric. Since I was putting right sides together, 2 units that both had the wedding dress fabric, they were sliding around when I was trying to stitch them under the sewing machine. So I started putting little clips in them to hold them in place while I ran them through the sewing machine. Once I got the leftmost 2 units together for each row, I started back, adding that 3rd unit to each row. Now it was time to put each row together. So I started with the first row and the second row. I put those right sides together. Then I used the nesting technique, making sure one of those seams is going one way, one seam is going the other way, and then I nest or kind of push them into place, then put a clip in that seam to hold it together. And I added extra clips in each row because this wedding dress fabric is very slippery and did not want to stay in place. With all my clips in place for each block, I stitched these rows together. And here are my two finished sampler blocks. So this will be the second block in my quilt, and I'm very pleased with the way this 8-point design turned out. I really like the little butterfly fabric in the middle. I love the wedding dress fabric. I can't wait to see how this quilt turns out. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.